Steam Deck previews are out and they're really good, but how does it stack up to the competition? How's it going, guys, and welcome to my new channel, Deck Ready. My name is Jimmy. You might have seen me around here on YouTube, but man, I am so excited for this handheld PC life that I'm about to start that I decided that it was a good idea to start a new channel all about it. So if that sounds good to you, maybe consider subscribing and setting your notifications to all. I'm gonna need your support if I'm gonna get this channel off the ground. You know what I'm saying? All right, so there's a ton of different websites and YouTubers and other reviewers out there who already have Steam Decks. Of course, I unfortunately am not one of them because I just started this channel, but Valve is being very careful about who they let talk about it early and what they let those people say. So the first 3 channels that were able to post an early preview were the Gamers Nexus, the Fox, and Linus Tech Tips. I don't care too much about thermals, to be completely real, and I'm not necessarily the biggest specs guy. All I really care about is getting games to run at a solid frame rate and be totally playable. So that's kind of where I come from on the PC side of things. So that's why I'm gonna focus on the Linus video, which I'm about to get way more in depth on. So the first thing he talked about was the overall build quality and the controls, like the stick layout, the D-pad, the buttons, and I was super excited about that because he said that it's largely very good, to the point where he said it's up there with his favorite handheld controls, especially the joysticks, which are on par with the Aya Neo Next. Now that was really interesting to me for a few reasons. First of all, I'm just excited again that the controls are really feeling good in the hand, because when you look at the Steam Deck, it's a very big machine and it doesn't necessarily look the most ergonomic, but it seems like the controls themselves work really good. And the second reason it was interesting is that I actually have an Aya Neo Next here with me in our studio, and this thing's controls feel really good to me. The triggers are really nice. They have some good travel. The R1 and L1 buttons have some nice heft to them as well. The joysticks, like Linus mentioned, feel absolutely incredible. And there's just a really good feel, like there's a punch to the buttons and the D-pad. Like I'm gonna hold it up to the mic and you can hear, like hopefully, that's like a very strong push that you've got out of the buttons. And the same thing goes for the D-pad. So to hear that everything is as good, if not a little bit better on the Steam Deck, that is music to my ears, especially considering that this thing starts at $400 and this thing starts at around $1,300. The next thing he talked about was thermals, which he said were largely really good. The one thing he noticed though is that when the fan ramps up all the way, the overall speed of the SoC drops just a little bit, but it was barely, if at all, noticeable on the actual device in terms of raw performance. And the reason he thinks that might be happening, which is not confirmed in any way, like he said he needs to do more research, is that he thinks when the fan speeds up all the way, it's drawing more power from the device, so the available power for the SoC is lowered by just a little bit. But again, no noticeable difference in performance, so that's awesome. After playing with the Aya Neo Next all weekend, the one feature that it has that I was really curious if Valve is going to have their own version of on SteamOS 3.0 is the Aya Space app. So this app comes preloaded on pretty much every Aya Neo device, and the way you use it is if you're playing a game or sitting on the desktop or doing anything, you just hit this button right here and it brings up the sub menu, and from there you can change the TDP, the fan speed, whatever you want about the device. And if you really want to get granular with it, you hold the same button and it'll open up the overall Aya Space app. It's super convenient, it's super easy, and on every game I tried it with, if I tapped that button, the overlay came up right away and the TDP changing was instant. Great example of that, I was playing Monster Hunter Rise because that's one of the biggest and beefiest Switch games that's come out over the past couple of years. It just came out on Steam, so I wanted to see if at the average settings, this device could run it at 60 frames per second. At the 20 watt TDP, did it totally fine. And if you go down to the 15 watt TDP or even the 10, you can lock it to 30 frames per second and everything's good. And you can do all of that from the game menu and the Aya Space pop-up menu. So naturally, knowing that the Steam Deck caps out by default at 15 watts of TDP, I wanted to know if Valve has a similar thing in the works. And unfortunately, they didn't let Linus or any of these other creators talk about the software because it's not ready yet, but he hinted a couple times that you can actually adjust the TDP. I just don't know if Valve has a simple, easy way to do it like Aya does, and if they don't, that's something I really want them to prioritize, because after using it all weekend, that is something that is so useful on a handheld PC like this. Like that determines hours of battery life on this device, and even though the Steam Deck seems super optimized, I'm assuming it's going to be the exact same scenario. After that, they jumped into the games, and this was the most impressive part of it because, again, this is a $400 device that is outperforming, in most cases, this $1,300 device. Now, this has a Radeon Vega 8 GPU, which is really beefy, really strong, but the Steam Deck uses RDNA 2, and Valve was talking this thing up, saying that it's going to outperform its competition, and from all the games that Linus and crew and like everyone else who got to test this thing were able to test because Valve limited them, it looks like that's the case. Like there were very few outlier games that were outperformed on other devices than the Steam Deck. Interestingly, one of those games was Dead Cells, right? So they ran it at the auto TDP setting and it got around 164.7 FPS on the Steam Deck. After they ran it at the high TDP setting, which I guess is just a maxed out 15 watt TDP, they got an average of 159 FPS, which is not bad by any means. Like, I'm not gonna complain at all about running Dead Cells at 159 FPS. And on this device, it runs just fine. I use VSync with it just to keep it locked at 60 because that makes the battery life last longer, but I'm gonna assume that because on the lower end Aya Neo, it ran so well, it's gonna run just as well, if not better on here. Now again, 159 FPS is nothing to scoff at, and the super cool thing is that Linus actually thinks the Steam Deck knew that game was running well above what it needed to be running at, so it lowered the overall TDP to keep the game running at lower frames so that the battery life would last longer. Now again, he didn't confirm that, but if the auto software on the Steam Deck is that smart, that shows why Valve picked that game out to show off with these review units, because if it's lowering the frame rate to an acceptable level to save battery life, that's ultimately a good thing in my opinion, because I know you can use this thing plugged in all the time and that's gonna be fine, and most people are probably gonna use it that way, but I wanna use it outside of my house, you know, and knowing that I'll get good battery life out of Dead Cells is awesome. Another game that was tested was Forza Horizon 5, and no matter what device it seems like you throw it at, it's gonna run at 60 frames per second at the low setting, which is awesome. Now, something really stood out to me in this portion of the video. Linus pointed out that there's this thing that happens in Forza Horizon 5 on the Steam Deck where it feels like the world slows down for a minute and then catches up with itself. And if you've ever played Forza Horizon 4, you probably know what I'm talking about, because I play Forza Horizon 5 on my 3080 laptop. It does the same thing, and it actually did the same thing here on the Aya Neo Next. I actually don't think this has anything to do with performance. I think it's more of an internet issue, like the game is losing connection with the server for a second and it's slowing down and catching back up, because if you put Forza Horizon 5 or even 4 for that matter into offline mode, that issue goes away complete. So long story short, knowing that these handhelds can run games like Forza Horizon 5 at 60 frames per second is awesome. And I know you're sitting there saying, well, it's at the low setting, and I'm gonna tell you right now that on an 800p screen that's only this big, it looks great. It does not look like low settings on a blown up TV. Linus also tried out Devil May Cry 5, which runs incredibly on the Steam Deck. They were able to basically lock it at 60 frames per second, and here on the Aya Neo Next, it does not run that well, which is kind of interesting to me. And the same thing goes for Control. They were able to get it to run at around 59 frames per second on average on the Steam Deck, but I can only get it to run between 40 and 50 FPS on this thing. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You could probably bump the settings up from low to medium-ish and get it to lock at 30 frames per second, but on PC, you always want to get 60 frames per second if you can, in most cases, you know what I mean? I mean, really, the whole video itself was just a huge list of positives. He praised the screen for getting super dim at night and keeping its color perfectly. He said that the speakers were absolutely incredible, to the point where he wants Valve to make a gaming headset, which I would also really love, because even just watching a YouTube video on my decent PC speakers, I could hear how good they were on the Steam Deck. And they're not that bad on this thing. They're pretty solid overall, but the fan really kicks up on the Aya Neo Next. And the speakers really struggle to like outperform it. And of course, you can use headphones, which everyone's probably going to do at some point, but I would like the speakers to be able to overpower the fan. So to know that the Steam Deck seems to be able to do it perfectly is awesome. Really, the only two negatives he had are that the rumble isn't that good in the device, which I'm really here nor there on. I'm glad it's there to begin with, but I don't need it to be absolutely incredible. And then also the charger that comes with it isn't like a brick that you can plug a USB cord into. The USB cord is like permanently attached to it, and the cord itself isn't that long. But I'm sure everyone at this point has a much longer USB-C charger at home that should be able to charge up your Steam Deck, so I don't think that's going to be a huge deal in the long run. All in all, the craziest thing here to me is that this too good to be true seeming device is actually turning out to not really be too good to be true. Now, of course, Valve limited the games they could test, but the games they were allowed to test weren't all very similar, right? Like, they were allowed to cover a wide array of different scope and scale and just overall graphic fidelity with tons of different settings. Like, none of these games were all that similar. You've got Forza Horizon 5, you've got Dead Cells, and they had Ghost Runner. So all of these games are completely different. I mean, just looking at any of them being played, you can obviously see that. So to know they all ran extremely well on the Steam Deck, that is super promising for me. And obviously, I know it's gonna have problems running some games here or there when it comes out, but if it's running at a baseline of very good, I'm happy, right? Like, $400 for a device like this is absolutely incredible. The one huge difference with it running SteamOS and its competition running Windows 11, I say competition in air quotes kind of because the prices are so out of whack, is that SteamOS has no implementation of pretty much any anti-cheat service out there. Like games like Destiny 2 or Apex Legends are not going to work out of the box on Steam Deck. Valve has said they're working to figure out a way to get these things onto the OS, but there's no time frame in which that's going to happen. And out of the box, this thing runs Destiny 2 extremely well. I was able to set it to a mix of low and medium settings and get a locked 30 frames per second. I played it for like 4 hours. It was plugged in, so I don't know how long it's gonna last on the battery, but it ran really well and I was able to do everything I wanted to do. I ran Dares of Eternity multiple times and got a ton of good drops on this Aya Neo Next, which was really cool, and that's one of the biggest use cases for me with the Steam Deck. I want to be able to play Destiny 2. I want to be able to do those ritual activities. Like running my strikes, running Gambit, doing Grasp of Avarice for the 500th time. That's all stuff that is really well suited to a handheld. So hopefully we don't have to wait too long for Valve to figure that out, because with this device, it works out of the box, but you know, $400 versus $1,300. I'll wait a little bit longer on the Steam Deck. The other good thing I immediately noticed about the Steam Deck versus its competition is the fact that Valve is behind it, which means you're going to get a lot more accessories for the Steam Deck right out of the gate. Like Dbrand already has a case ready to go for launch. It's called the Kill Switch, which is kind of funny because, you know, that's the whole intention of the Steam Deck. And yeah, that's not the biggest deal in the world. I know the Aya Neo has a huge fan base out there, and I actually really like this thing. It's gonna be hard to give it up. I might not totally give it up when the Steam Deck comes out, but at the end of the day, it just feels nice to get an official Valve product that it seems like they're going to support. You know, I know they have an iffy history with stuff like the Steam controller and to some extent the Valve Index, but with the Steam Deck, if enough people buy it, they are going to support it, and the demand seems to be through the roof, which is a promising sign. And the last thing I'm going to point out is that none of these reviewers were able to talk about the OS at all. They were able to say like very general things like it runs SteamOS, but all of them seemed extremely excited, like they were just dying to talk about the software. And you could take that good or bad, but all of them were generally very positive about their play experience on the Steam Deck, so I'm going to assume they at least like it. And I'm not going to blame Valve or fault them for stopping these people from talking about it, because as far as we know, they'll be able to talk about it a little bit more before launch. When I finished watching these videos, especially the Linus video, I just sat there and let out this huge sigh of relief. When the Steam Deck was announced, I was so excited. I was like, this is giving me the excitement that the next gen consoles have not really given me up until this point. It feels genuinely new, it feels genuinely exciting, and I am just so excited to actually get my hands on this thing and start playing some games on it. You know, the biggest draw for me is that I play the vast majority of my games on Steam, and all of my saves are right there. So it's gonna be sweet when I download all these games that I already own to have my saves ready to go. But yeah, guys, I think that wraps it up for my first video here on Deck Ready. If you enjoyed it and you genuinely want to see more videos, make sure you subscribe, and it would really help me out if you set your notifications to all. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of this type of video, and if you want to see me compare this Aya Neo Next to the Steam Deck when I finally get my hands on it, also let me know about that down in the comments as well. Anyway guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.